And so the idea was that ketones could provide an alternative fuel to the brain and possibly help improve somebody with Alzheimer's. And these two studies had shown that, yes, this actually happened. But then they mentioned in the patent application that MCT oil is extracted from coconut oil. And I thought, aha, I knew. And we used to add it, MCT oil, to a little bit to the feedings, each of the feedings of our tiniest preemies. These are babies that were 2 pounds and under. We used to add it to their feedings. They would absorb it really well, and they would gain weight faster, and they'd get home faster. You too.
I'm well. I'm well. It's a beautiful Friday. I'm a little hot and
Yeah.
sweaty, but it's been a really good morning so far. How are you?
I'm excellent. Excellent.
Love that. Love that. So I wanted to ask, how was Japan? I know you just took a trip.
Oh my gosh, it was incredible. It was incredible. I had the most wonderful time from beginning to end and a lot of really unusual foods. And but I tried everything. I tried everything and I liked it. And I had, wonderful meals. We got to go in the mountains and visit a town called Nikko. It was just beautiful. It had waterfalls, temples, shrines that were hundreds of years old. It was just really impressive, and got to see some of Tokyo and Yokohama, and it was just
Ooh,
incredible. Yeah, I was there to give a presentation, and that went really well too.
yes.
Yeah,
Oh, yay. Spreading the message worldwide. That's the
exactly,
goal.
exactly.
Yes. Oh, I love that so much.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really exciting. I'm going through an insurance thing right now, and my insurance appraiser's name is Nico.
Oh,
So the synchronicities there is really nice.
that's funny. That's funny.
Yes,
Coincidence.
yeah, I would really love to check that out one day. I'm going to put that on my bucket list.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah.
Hmm.
So for our listeners that maybe have never heard of you and have heard of your
Yeah.
work, why don't you tell us about a little bit about your background,
Hmm.
and then we can dive into some history about
Hmm.
your husband, your
Yeah.
late
Yeah.
husband, and MCT oil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm a physician and I am a newborn specialist, neonatologist, newborn intensive care. I did that for 30 years in Florida. And then I followed that up with hospice. My husband ended up in hospice care, and the emergencies with newborn ICU were frequent, and any time of the day or night just wasn't very compatible. My husband had early onset Alzheimer's disease. And so I did hospice for several years, going to people's homes, and a very opposite end of what I had been doing for the first 30 years. And then I did home health risk assessments, they were called, for Medicaid and Medicare. So I did home visits with people, and I really enjoyed that a lot. It was an hour, hour and a half visit, and reviewing somebody's entire medical history and being able to make some recommendations. I didn't really manage their care, their physicians did that, but I really enjoyed the job. and but it gave me exposure. Since I'd been a newborn specialist, I had so many people with all kinds of neurological problems were part of what I saw. Many people that had Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, other types of dementia. I even had some children with autism, that type of thing that I saw, while I was doing that. And then the pandemic kind of shut that down. It was relatively elective, and stopped doing that at the end of 2022. So
Yeah.
now I just write and write and write at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, I mean, it's really wonderful for you to be able to put it down pen to paper and get it into
Hmm.
books and get that information out there,
Yeah,
because that's really how the legacy is going to continue. So,
yeah.
um, yeah, and now you're traveling worldwide to also
Hmm.
spread your message.
Yeah,
I actually
yeah.
found you through a TED Talk,
Oh,
and
I think that was in around
yes.
2014 that I did that at University of South Florida 10 years ago. I can't believe it's been that long. And a lot
Wow.
of people find me that way.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You got a lot of exposure that way. And then
Mhm.
also the news broadcast that
Mhm.
did a full interview on your husband and your
Mhm.
story.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I also got to see the photo of you holding up the clocks, the three different
Oh,
clocks.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so that really piqued my interest, and I really wanted
Ah.
to learn more about,
Mhm.
this fantastic oil that is helping
Mm.
to slow the aging of our
Mhm.
brains.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So why don't you tell us about Steve's story and
Yeah.
MCT oil? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, my husband Steve was an accountant. He worked from home, which was awesome. He could, my medical practice was purely in the hospital, so we didn't have a business office, and that
Okay.
became our home. So he was an accountant, but when he was only 51, we had two daughters too. I mean, we have two daughters. They're now 38, but they were like in their early teens at this point
Okay.
when he started having a problem. So when he was 51, he started having problems just getting his work done and filing tax returns, like quarterly returns that were real simple. He would procrastinate for days, and then he started forgetting if he'd been to the bank and the post office, which he went to every day. He was only 51, so that was really kind of strange to me. And his he also was depressed, and he saw a neuropsychiatrist who evaluated him and mentioned dementia, but he said more likely the memory issues were related to depression. But later we realized he was depressed most likely because he knew something was wrong. He knew something was seriously wrong, and he hadn't really shared that with me yet, but he was having memory issues for several years. And I hadn't caught on, and he was put on antidepressants, didn't really help, it didn't slow down what was going on, and over a few more years, his memory declined very significantly. He couldn't find his way around, even with a map, and just doing weird things. He'd spend like hours and hours looking for something in his garage, and I thought, "What is going on?" And so we finally saw a neurologist who diagnosed him with Alzheimer's, early onset Alzheimer's disease, when he was only age 54.
Oh,
And he steadily got worse. Um, and when he was 56, I found a Mediterranean diet. There was a study, I had never thought that Alzheimer's, that nutrition would have anything to do with Alzheimer's. I was not ever under that impression. But then I came across a study that people who were eating the most Mediterranean-like diet lived on average 4 years longer than people who ate the least Mediterranean-like diet, the people that had Alzheimer's. And so we switched over. I just started studying nutrition intensely. I read a whole bunch of books, and then I decided the Mediterranean diet, it was a whole food diet, low in simple sugars, very complex carbohydrates like refined grains instead of unrefined, like white bleached flour, that kind of thing. And we started eating more fish and more fresh vegetables. We've been eating what I call a convenience food diet up to that point. Packaged frozen foods from Sam's were my favorite thing. You could put them in the microwave for 20 minutes, and we'd eat a lot of fast food. We went out to eat a lot and, had desserts and all of that. And so we switched over to a Mediterranean diet and really stuck with it, but he continued to decline. I have no idea if it slowed it down, but I benefited greatly from it. I lost a lot of weight. I felt better. I stopped craving carbs, because it's much lower in carbohydrate than the typical American diet. So when he was 58, this was in 2008, he was declining very quickly. Um, he could hardly finish a sentence. He would lose his train of thought. I remember gardening, and he used to be able to just plant all the new plants himself, and weed and all that. He was digging a hole, and he couldn't remember if he was pulling the dirt out or putting it back in. He was so confused, just digging a hole to put a plant in. And there were things like that going on. He wasn't able to find a meal for himself. Like for lunch, he couldn't make a sandwich, and he wouldn't even remember if he'd eaten or not. And he had lost some weight, maybe about 10 pounds, and things just weren't going well. And in May of 2008, there were two new clinical trials. I was always watching for these, and they were two different drugs. They removed these plaques from the brain that are the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. And I scheduled them for 2 days in a row. And so the night before the first screening for the clinical trial, I got online to look at the risks and benefits of those two drugs. And then I just happened on a press release about a medical food that was in development. And it was still about a year away, but they had already conducted a couple of clinical trials. And in the first trial, after a single dose of this medical food, um, that people, they were studied, like one day they got the medical food, 2 weeks later or before they got a placebo that didn't have the active ingredient in it. And half of them, these people with Alzheimer's, improved, almost half, like 9 out of 20. And then they did a much longer study, 152 people. They tested them at 45 and 90 days. Some people stayed in for 6 months. And again, almost half of them had significant improvement in their memory and cognition. And none of the Alzheimer's drugs ever claim that. They claim to slow decline for maybe 6 months. And that's, the best that they've been able to come up with, as far as drugs. So this sounded really hopeful, and they didn't say what it was or how it worked. So I was able to find their patent application. And I learned a lot from that. I learned that Alzheimer's is a type of diabetes of the brain. There's a problem of getting glucose into certain areas of the brain, and every cell in your body needs fuel to operate. And when you eat a typical diet, that fuel is glucose, sugar. And so people, 10, 20 years before they even have symptoms of Alzheimer's, they're already having problem getting glucose into parts of their brain, and it's due to insulin resistance and insulin deficiency. It's very much like type 2 diabetes, but it affects your brain instead of like other organs. And it just continues to worsen over time, and then you develop symptoms, and it just keeps progressing. It just keeps getting worse and worse. So I learned about this, and then they mentioned that ketones are an alternative fuel to glucose for the brain. And when you take the product, it turned out was medium chain triglyceride oil, MCT oil, that they had used in the study. And MCT oil, when you consume it, no matter what you eat, part of it is converted to ketones, and ketones are an alternative fuel for the brain. And it turns out that studies a few years later, well, in 2016, showed that, in fact, ketones are taken up normally in the brain in the same areas, like people who have Alzheimer's, taken up normally in the same areas that do not take up glucose normally. Ketones don't need insulin to get into cells. Glucose does, directly or indirectly. And so the idea was that ketones could provide an alternative fuel to the brain and possibly help improve somebody with Alzheimer's. And these two studies had shown that, yes, this actually happened. So, and I was actually familiar with MCT oil. I mean, I might have just dropped it there, not realizing I could actually get it, except that I'm a neonatologist, a newborn specialist. And we used to add MCT oil, to a little bit to the feedings, each of the feedings of our tiniest preemies. These are babies that were 2 pounds and under. We used to add it to their feedings. They would absorb it really well, and they would gain weight faster, and they'd get home faster. And and then we also had like an IV intravenous fat, like babies that couldn't eat. We would use the fat, and it was half MCT oil and half soybean oil is what we were giving them at the time. And I thought, so I knew what MCT oil was. I remembered in medical school learning that MCT oil is converted to ketones. And I thought, okay, this sounds reasonable. This could really happen. So I was reading about this, and it was 1 a.m. in the morning, and he was scheduled at 9 a.m. for screening, for this first clinical trial. So we ended up having a day before and a day after he started coconut oil, which is incredible. So I didn't know that you could get MCT oil, that it was available. I thought maybe only hospitals could get it, but then they mentioned in the patent application that MCT oil is extracted from coconut oil. And I thought, aha, I knew I had seen that in health food stores. So I had an idea what I could do. But it was, so we're, going at 9 a.m. for a screening, and I didn't have time to go out and get coconut oil. So we went for the screening, and he had to take a 30-point test called the mini mental status exam, and he got only 14 points out of 30, and he needed 16 to qualify for the study. So we were really, really devastated, because we'd been waiting for a study to come along in our area for years. And that was the first one that had come along. And then the doctor had him draw a clock. I'm going to try to show you the clock. Let's see if we can get it. Okay. That is supposed to be a clock.
Just a
And
bunch of circles. Yep.
a few little circles
Yep.
and a few numbers.
Yep.
And the doctor said that's very disorganized. He's on the verge of severe Alzheimer's. And
Yep.
you can imagine, I sensed that, but to see that clock just kind of really blew me away. And on the way home, I thought, what do we have to lose? We're going to get some coconut oil. So we went way out of our way. The only store I had ever thought I had seen it in. And although it was at my local grocery store, I just didn't know that. Anyway, so picked up coconut oil. And when we got home, I was able to find the fatty acid composition of coconut oil. And to figure out how much of these medium chain triglycerides were in the oil, and it was 60%, 60%. And so I figured out how much coconut oil to give him that would be equal to the dose of the medical food that they were giving the people in the study. And it turned out that this was just over 2 tablespoons, 7 teaspoons was what it added up to. So a little over 2 tablespoons. That's a lot of oil to take for the first time, right? We were lucky Steve tolerated it. So the next day, he was scheduled to try out for the other drug trial, different location. It was in Tampa instead of St. Petersburg, different facility, different doctors. And so he was scheduled at 1 in the afternoon, and around like 8 or 9 a.m., we had breakfast, and I mixed the 7 teaspoons of coconut oil into some oatmeal because coconut oil, like at our room temperature, tends to be kind of semi-solid, but it melts very quickly. As soon as it hits anything warm, even your skin, it'll just melt really fast. And so mixed it into some oatmeal, and around 1 o'clock, he was screened again at this place in Tampa, the Bird Alzheimer Institute. And this time he gained 4 points on this 30-point test. His score came up to 18. He needed 16 to qualify, and he got into the study. And we were really blown away. I know, it was incredible. And I thought, did we just get lucky? Was it prayers? Or was it, this oil that I had given him? And so I thought, well, we're going to keep it going, and we're going to see what happens. And so every day from that day on, I started giving him 35 grams. Well, it was the 7 teaspoons at breakfast. For those who know grams, it's you can weigh it on a scale, 35 grams. And but then I thought, well, one thing I had learned in the patent application is that when they measured the ketone levels in the people in the study, they found that the ketone levels peaked at about 90 minutes, and then they were gone after 3 hours. And I thought, wait a minute, your brain needs fuel 24/7. The brain's even really active when we're sleeping. It uses a lot of fuel even when we're sleeping. So I thought, I'll just start giving this to him at lunch and at dinner. And I got a bunch of recipes. I found cookbooks for coconut oil. You can just use it like any other oil. When you're cooking, you can mix it into foods that are warm, very easily. You just have to kind of keep the temperature, like in the oven, at 350 or below. And you have to use kind of a low medium heat. Like my stove has 9, a setting of 9, and I use like between 3 and 4. when I cook with coconut oil, as long as it doesn't smoke, the oil is fine, and it's actually a really good stable cooking oil, at low heat. So I started putting it into recipes um, I, and you know just making it fun. Some people eat it off a spoon, but some people gag when they do that. I mean, it's just not fun for the long term to eat, an oil off of a spoon, but I think it's more fun to cook with it and just make it part of your diet. It makes it so easy. And he steadily improved even the next day that, by fourth or fifth day, he had improved so much that we looked at each other and said, "Our life has changed for the better." And he said he felt like the light bulb came on in his brain the day he started coconut oil. And then there were just things like he had been very sluggish. He walked with a slow, stiff gait. He had trouble picking his feet up. He couldn't run anymore. He couldn't tie his shoes. He couldn't finish a sentence. And he talked very little when he would first come out in the morning, for breakfast, and had trouble getting a utensil out of the drawer. He couldn't remember which one he was going for. He'd come out with a knife instead of a spoon repeatedly, couldn't remember how to use the dispenser for water in the refrigerator. And all of those things improved over 4 to 5 days. He just started, walking faster, kind of bouncing down the hall. He started whistling and joking again, finishing sentences, and then he could get the water out of the fridge. He could get the right utensil. And it was pretty dramatic what happened even during those first few days. And then we even had the testing to show that his memory had improved. And so kept it going. And then, after 2 weeks, he drew another clock. And let's see, that's the second clock that he drew.
Wow, after
And you can see it's now
2 weeks.
got a whole circle.
Yeah.
It's got all the numbers. I think there's an extra number or two in there. A whole bunch of what I thought were hands of the clock. But he said no, he was trying to line up the numbers across from each other to make it look neat. So that's what the lines were, to try to line the numbers up. And then he drew, a little over a month later, he drew this clock. And
Wow.
it's a little bit tidier, and you can see more that idea that he's trying to line the numbers up across from each other. So um, he qualified, for the study, and he had another mini mental status exam about 2 months later. Like if you start anything new, studies, they usually want like a new medication. They want you to wait at least 2 months before you enter a study to make sure that's all stable and that it, in theory, would not affect the results of the study. And he scored 20 on the mini mental status exam. So he came up even more, a couple months later, and qualified for the other study. And then we got to choose. That turned out to be not so good. And that's another later part of the study. But, he, around 2 weeks, well, I started talking with Dr. Richard Beach. He was an expert in ketones at the NIH. He had dedicated his life to working at the NIH, and he had started studying ketones intensively in the 1990s. He believed that there might be therapeutic uses for diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, other types of dementia, autism, even diabetes and congestive heart failure. Ketones are a very basic fuel like glucose. And there are a lot of diseases in which, like people with type 2 diabetes, their kidneys don't take up glucose normally, their liver doesn't, the brain, the eyes. I mean, all of the organs are affected if you have um, insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes. So he felt that this could be really beneficial to people with diabetes to prevent complications, the common complications like kidney failure and blindness or late complications of type 2 diabetes. So I started talking with him, and at first he said, no, 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 the levels would never be high enough to help somebody with Alzheimer's. And from coconut oil and from MCT oil, because I was also finding out more about those studies that I had told you about. And but then I faxed him the clocks, from that first clock and then the one at 2 weeks. And he called me back and he said, "Well, this is unexpected." He said he was developing a ketone ester since the 1990s, and he had finally hit on a formulation that he thought would work well. It's something you could just drink. It would greatly increase your ketone levels 10 times higher, 10, 20 times higher than coconut or MCT oil, and very quickly within 30 to 60 minutes. And so he he was shocked that low levels like that could be beneficial. And he just started sending me, he had written papers about his hypothesis, but they hadn't really tested this themselves in people yet. They were doing studies with mice, showing that it did appear to protect the brain and it did appear to improve cognition and anxiety in mice. And, he was really had been trying and trying to get funding for human studies for Alzheimer's, and he hadn't been able to get funding yet. So it was all, I started thinking, Steve improved so much, and this medical food was not going to come out for another year. I need to get this message out. At that time, they were saying there were 35 million people in the world with dementia, Alzheimer's, or some other type of dementia. Alzheimer's is about 60% of dementias. And I thought, okay, I have this big secret. And the medical food people, I mean, in their press release, they didn't really come out and say what it was, but it was on the shelf. Even the MCT oil that they use in their product was available online for bodybuilders were using it. People who wanted to lose weight were using it. And Dr. Beach then, he said, let's measure his levels and his ketone levels. So Steve took 2 doses of coconut oil one day, 35 grams or the 7 teaspoons each time. And he measured his levels for 3 hours after, and his ketone levels went up. They just didn't go up very much, but they were kind of real stable, and it took a long time for the levels to come back down again. And in the evening, his levels went up even more, and they were like increasing after 3 hours, like greatly increasing. And we had no idea because we only measured up to 3 hours, how high the levels got. And then a couple weeks after that, he said, let's do the same with MCT oil. And this time, just like in the other studies, Steve's level peaked at about 90 minutes and it was back to the baseline around 3 hours. And but the levels were higher. They were higher than with coconut oil. So Dr. Veach said, why don't you add some MCT oil to his diet? And at that point, I found out that you could get MCT oil. It was available, on Amazon, and a lot of companies were, well, probably 4 or 5 companies were selling it at that point. There were a few health food stores that carried it, the ones that cater to bodybuilders. And and he wanted me to stop coconut oil, but I thought, wait a minute, he improved so much just with coconut oil. There might be something else in it that might be beneficial, So I decided to start mixing the two. I started making a mixture of virgin coconut oil and MCT oil. Steve just kept improving. He kept improving. And for example, around 2 months, he could tie his shoes again, and he was walking completely normally again, and he could run again, which he hadn't been able to do for quite some time. And he could finish his sentences. We could have a conversation. I mean, before this, I would tell him about something that went on with my day. His answer would be completely nothing to do with what I had just told him. But now we could have a real conversation. I really felt like I got my husband back. It was really quite amazing. And he had tremors that had gone away. And he had another example. This was around 3.5 months. I had been kind of slowly increasing the MCT and coconut oil that he was getting. And around 3.5 months, one day he said, I can read again. He hadn't been able to read for about a year and a half. And then he said, I can read again. And I said, well, why couldn't you read? And he said, well, when he would look at a page, the words would shake around. He said it was like breakup on your satellite, the TV, the satellite breakup. The words looked like they went into little pixels and they would move around on the page. And that had stopped so he could read. And around, a few months later, his reading comprehension improved. And around 9 or 10 months, he could remember what he had read several hours earlier. And what my favorite example is that I had a doctor appointment and he was in the waiting room and there were some Scientific Americans there and he had read a story about Albert Einstein. And a few hours later, he said, "Oh, I read this interesting article about Albert Einstein in Scientific American." And he told me details about it. I was just blown away because he couldn't even remember what he was saying to finish a sentence, much less remember what he'd read hours earlier. And then somewhere around 9 or 10 months, he just kind of leveled off. He improved, had continuously improved up to that point. And he improved so much. He wanted to work. He really wanted to work. He was just tired of not working. And he was able to get a volunteer job at the hospital that I worked at. And he worked in their supply warehouse. He helped deliver, pack, the supplies to the different nursing units. And he would put stickers on supplies, and that really made him feel so much better. He did that a couple days a week. And, so it was really dramatic. And I just had to, after that, what happened at 2 weeks with the clock, I thought I have to start telling people about this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Wow. Incredible. That is
yeah.
just miraculous. And how many books do you have out now? Four?
Oh, I have 4 books. I have, so the third edition of my first book just came out in September. So this is it. It's called Alzheimer's Disease: What If There Was a Cure? The Story of Ketones. And it's Steve's story. Is the first third of it is really it teaches people a lot about Alzheimer's disease and including how to deal with certain problems. The sad part about dementia is that people often don't know what's coming. Nobody teaches you what is coming with this, and there's too many surprises and too many things that don't make no sense whatsoever. And some of them are really hard to anticipate. Like some people, they'll wander away from home, and there's always a first time that happens,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't know that it's going to happen. A lot of people like to take a walk, and you'll hear about somebody with Alzheimer's. They went out just to take their usual walk, and they didn't come home, and then they get lost. I've heard of people being lost in the woods. I had a patient when I did hospice. She had gone out the back door of her house into the woods, and it was 14 hours before anybody found her. It was horrible. It was just horrible. Her family lived right next door. They had no idea they even had cameras in the house, and they had no idea she had wandered out, like during the night, late in the evening. She had wandered out, and they found her the next day back in the woods. I mean, terrible things like that happen. Sometimes it ends up, fatal. It was just horrible. But people, it's just hard to know when that person's going to lose track of where they are when they're
Mm-hmm.
driving or out taking a walk. Those are just one of so many different examples.
Mm-hmm.
I really think there needs to be much, much more education. When somebody is diagnosed, their family needs to know step by step what is going to happen, try to anticipate these problems so that they can avoid getting into serious trouble with them.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so, uh,
Yeah.
anyway, you know, uh,
Wow. Yeah. When you said 35 million people,
yeah,
that really hit me because that is a large number.
that's a large number. In the
Yeah.
U.S., it's over 6 million in the
Wow.
U.S., and it's been increasing, um, especially as the aging population has been
Right.
increasing. It happens more often in older people, like only about 2% of the dementias are early onset before age
Mm-hmm.
65, like Steve. And he had it really early. He was only 51. And there's some people, even in their 30s and 40s, that
Mm-hmm.
they inherit it. They have
Mm-hmm.
a gene that mutated that gives them, they have a 50-50 chance if one of
Mm-hmm.
their parents has dementia of developing dementia themselves. That's pretty intimidating. And it starts
Oh.
early. It can start in their 30s. Really bad.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Look at that. Look at
Yeah,
that.
it's bad.
You
So
know,
yeah,
yeah.
go ahead.
When I was when I was pregnant, they talk about pregnancy brain, and
Oh,
I
yeah.
do remember
It's a thing.
there was a
Yeah.
few times when for a long portion of my life too, I did
Mhm.
smoke a lot of marijuana, so I will put that
Mhm.
out there as well. And
Yeah, yeah.
with the increase and the rise of all of the things that we're putting in
Mhm.
our bodies, that
Yeah.
is playing a huge part.
Yeah, and it's
in
not
that,
just things like marijuana, it's things that are in our food.
right? Oh my gosh, yes.
Because the ultra
Yeah,
processed foods, they have so many chemicals that haven't really been thoroughly tested to know what long-term effects of eating this day in, day out are. And,
yeah.
they tend to be loaded with fructose, which it's a sugar that was high fructose corn syrup. It was created around 1970, and it's just skyrocketed. It's in almost all of the sugary beverages, like,
Yeah,
carbonated, colas and
right.
Mountain Dew and, those
Yeah.
kind of things. And it's very inflammatory. It
Oh,
can cause inflammation in any tissue in your body, and especially in the brain. It's well known to do that. So that's just one ingredient that's really common in ultra processed foods. I mean,
mm,
they even add sugar to milk, like cow milk, just what you put on the shelf. It's just not sweet enough, so we gotta always add sugar,
yeah,
to everything. A lot of orange juices, they're already very sweet, and it's hard to find one that doesn't have added sugar. So
yes, yeah, yeah.
there are a lot
It's
of beverages out there,
it's
and
funny.
these, yeah,
Oh, yeah. Go ahead. Go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. So, I mean, there's a study showing that if you drink just one sugary beverage a day, and this could even be 100% fruit juice, that
Mhm.
it ages your brain. It causes our brains start shrinking a little bit every year after like our late 30s, a tiny bit, it'll shrink. Well, it causes advanced shrinking. It kind of accelerates it. And it also accelerates memory loss as you get older too. Somebody that drinks, I think it was more than two sugary beverages a day. These were people in their 50s. They tested. They had 13 years advanced memory loss, compared to other people their age who weren't drinking these
Huh.
sugary beverages. And the diet sodas didn't seem to cause that problem, which was interesting.
Oh,
And a lot of people say diet, beverages aren't good either, and they're probably not. There's probably other reasons why they're not. But compared to these sugary drinks, they didn't see this problem, with the brain shrinkage and memory impairment, accelerated memory impairment. So,
yeah. That's good to
I don't
know.
know.
That's good to know because my dad
Yeah.
is very adamant on his diet pop. So
Yeah,
he
yeah,
drinks a lot of
yeah.
pop, but it's diet
It's
pop.
good that
So
he's drinking. When I did the home health risk assessments, I had a lot of people that had type 2 diabetes, and a lot of them seemed to have, they'd be taking like three oral medications, insulin two or three times a day, different one or two types of insulin, but they were drinking Coca-Cola, you know, all, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and eating carbs all day long. I mean, a lot of sugar in their diet when I would go over their diet, and they didn't really seem to have gotten any serious training in diet and controlling how to control their carbs
right,
and things that were clearly bad for you, like
right.
drinking, colas and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And, it's really sad, that there just isn't that kind of education, for
Hmm.
people that have diabetes, because as soon as you lower the carbs when you're diabetic, your blood sugar comes down really fast. And
Hmm.
if you can stay on a low carb diet, like your hemoglobin A1C, that's a measurement of it. It gives you an idea of what your average blood sugar was over about 3 months. And that's a really important thing that is followed when somebody has diabetes. That over a matter of months, the hemoglobin A1C can come back completely to normal, and the fasting blood sugar completely to normal. If somebody goes on a low carb, higher fat diet, they can get that under control. And diabetes, 30% of people with diabetes go on to develop dementia. So
Hmm.
this is something, it's treatable with diet, and it could help prevent dementia, to get those carbs under control.
Hmm.
And, so I think the easiest way for people to do that, I suggest, well, trying to, go more to whole grains, like whole grain rice, whole wheat, well, wheat, there's other reasons maybe not to eat wheat so much or not so much of it. But start by reducing your portions in half. Like some people will load up their plate with pasta, I mean, and then put the sauce on the top of it, the whole plate, We'll cut that in half and then put the same amount of, the meat, the sauce that you were going to use on top of it. And use maybe one slice of bread and pile your meat and cheese up, when you're making a sandwich, instead of using two slices of bread, that kind of thing. Eat half the rice you would usually eat. Um, and then when you're used to that, 2 or 3 weeks later, cut it in half again. And now you're a quarter of a serving. You still get a reasonable amount, something that you like. It tastes good. The first few bites are the best. The rest is just to fill you up. And there's a study, it's going to probably come out really soon, be published soon. It was in like an elder care home. I believe it was in Canada. And it's near not too far from Toronto, where you mentioned Dr. Stephen Cunnane. And they found that they had the people in this facility, they were elderly people, eat just their usual breakfast, but then they cut the carb portions in half for lunch and for dinner. And they found it dropped their blood sugar by 40%. That is really substantial, when they
Yeah.
just cut their carb servings in half. And so, that's just kind of an easy way to cut down on carbs. And then just try to get away from things that have white flour. Look for
Mhm.
whole grains. Whole grain rice is really very tasty. A lot of people say, "Oh, I love my white rice," but it's like over 90% pure sugar when you digest it.
That is good to know. I'm gonna
Yeah,
cut that out of my diet. And
yeah.
I have introduced a lot more coconut oil since the last
Mhm.
time we spoke.
Yeah.
And
How's it
yeah,
going?
it's going really well. It's
Yeah.
actually going really well. I even quit smoking cigarettes, so
Awesome.
that's been great.
Wow.
Yes.
That is
Yeah.
just one of the best things you can do. That and
Oh my
cutting the
gosh.
cutting the sugar, I
Hmm.
think, people often ask me, like when we do an interview, what is the number one thing you would do with a diet? And I say, reduce the sugar in your diet because you just don't want to get diabetes. Even pre-diabetes sets you up for dementia. And,
Yeah.
like 3/4 of people in the US that are 75 or older either have type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes. Three
Oh,
quarters of them. It's something
wow.
that's more likely to happen as you get older, and it's
Yeah.
and that's the age when all these memory issues start happening, and that you're
Yeah.
more prone to developing dementia. So it doesn't matter what age you are, you can always start cutting carbs and maybe reduce your risk. And the
Mm-hmm.
sooner the better.
Wow.
In your
Yeah.
30s is really good.
Yeah, I'm honestly, I'm just so grateful that I met
Mhm.
you and
Oh,
I'm
thank you.
learning this stuff because I am in my early 30s.
Ah, there you go.
And diabetes runs in both sides of my family. My dad
Yeah,
does have it, and my
yeah,
grandmother on my mom's side has it. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's something I need to watch out for.
Hmm.
And I'm going to share this video with my dad,
Oh,
and
good.
I hope that if even one or two people will get a chance to see this
Yeah,
and get to share it with someone, and
yeah,
the message gets spread.
yeah.
And most importantly, like you were saying about Steve,
Hmm.
how he was noticing that his memory was starting to slip, but he wasn't
Hmm.
talking about it.
Yeah,
And
and
I feel
that's
like,
really
yeah,
common. Most
very.
people, they kind of sense something before
Mhm.
other people catch on.
Yeah, yeah. We're
And
always trying to
and
protect each other, protect our
right,
loved ones.
right. And they don't want to stop driving, that's for sure.
Yeah.
When you get to a certain age, if you start telling people you're having a problem with your memory, they're going to take your keys away.
That's very
So a
true.
lot of people, they kind of do keep it a secret, even from their spouse, and especially from their children.
Yes, yes. That's a good
Yeah,
point. That's a good point
yeah, yeah.
because nobody wants, the consequences that come with it.
Hmm.
So yeah, in trying to protect our loved ones and
Hmm.
hide from it,
Yeah,
we're doing ourselves a disservice because we're not taking the precautions and
right.
the things that could really benefit our health, like cutting back on
Hmm.
carbs.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because I find that, like, especially with the increase of prices of everything. Like,
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know about where you live, but where I live,
Mhm.
I've heard a lot of people commenting on how expensive it is to live in Toronto
Yeah.
now. It's just as expensive as New York,
Oh my
and
gosh. Wow.
yeah, it's honestly it's
Yeah.
repulsive.
Yeah.
And so many people are, surviving off the food bank and just
Mhm.
trying
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
make it like we're living in university again, and we're just
Yeah.
making it with basic things. So
Yeah.
carb
Yeah.
loading is, something that people are doing just to survive now.
Mhm.
So yeah, just,
Yeah.
even planting a little garden and having the
Mhm.
opportunity to grow our own vegetables would be really
Yeah.
beneficial.
Yeah, it is, and vegetables are really, really, really good for people. I mean, I until we went to that Mediterranean diet, the only vegetables I would eat were lettuce and corn, and I might throw if I was at like a buffet, like with a bunch of like a salad bar, I might throw a few other things in there, but I really didn't like vegetables. And the crazy thing, you know, when I started doing the Mediterranean diet, it involved a lot more cooking, and I found, you know what, I actually do like fresh vegetables. I just had not really done any serious cooking with fresh vegetables, but they're actually good and you adapt to things. And the best part about it, like by the third day of doing that diet, the carbs were probably a quarter of what I used to eat, up to that point.
Right.
I was eating low fat everything because that's what we were told to do, eat a low fat diet. And we were eating more olive oil. But within 3 days, I was no longer thinking about my next meal and thinking, what sweet thing can I eat? Carbs do that to you. Your insulin level goes up when you eat simple carbs, especially, and it'll go way up, it'll spike, and then when it comes back down again, it stimulates hormones that make you hungry again, and this can happen like 2 hours after you had a good meal, but
Mm,
with carbs, and if you eat what are called if you eat refined grains, for example, instead of if you eat unrefined grains like whole grain rice instead of the other rice, your insulin level doesn't go up as much and it comes down. And the same thing with carbs from fresh vegetables. A lot of the carbs in fresh vegetables are fiber, and you don't even digest or absorb fiber, that stays in your gut. It's actually really good. There are bacteria that use that create all kinds of metabolites that we use in our body that are really important. People don't realize, you think bacteria are bad, but these bacteria are really good. You feed them with fiber, so that's what whole grains have that the like white flour and white rice don't have. They have fiber, which is really important.
okay.
And I don't know, I just it's a whole food diet. You look in the produce section and well, like berries are very low in sugar. Those are good, and like apricots are low in sugar. There's a few fruits that are fairly low in sugar that you can still eat. I have blueberries every day. I love blueberries, so I have blueberries. And uh, you know, it's just a completely different way of eating, and I love it. I never thought I would. I would have rolled my eyes if you told me, I need to eat more fresh vegetables. This is when I was 55, and
Yeah.
it's I feel healthier now, much healthier now. I'm 72, and I feel much healthier now than I did when I was 55. And I managed to lose about 60 pounds. I've kept 60 pounds off in all that time. Yeah, it took a while to lose it, but it was easy because I wasn't craving the carbs all the time and
Yeah.
thinking about the next meal. I mean, it wasn't easy, but you had to keep at it. But
Yeah.
it was worth it. And, I don't have a lot of the aches and pains that people my age have. And I can get up steps without hanging onto a rail,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
no prescription medications.
Right.
My
Yeah.
blood pressure is really normal. And that's just from eating, good, healthy, whole foods.
Yeah, that's really
Hmm.
good.
Yeah,
Like the marketing is really big. Everything comes down to money, right? So the
it
marketing
does.
is really big, not just for
Yeah.
like prescription drugs, but for
Hmm.
food and pops and
Hmm.
sugary things and
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
that stuff. And they get us while we're young. The whole
Right.
point is to keep us while we're
Yeah.
young, so they have us for
Yeah.
50 years, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I
yeah.
have to add something about that because,
Okay.
I'm a pediatrician, newborn specialist, and so I this was maybe a year and a half ago. I thought I'm just going to look at some of the labels in the infant aisle, where they have all the
Yes.
foods and stuff. I was
Yes.
shocked. I was shocked. I mean, they had something called snack for babies. And it had a little face of a little baby that looked like, a few months old, like a Gerber baby. I think it was the Gerber baby because it was a Gerber product. And it was little wafers that they said they were made from yogurt. It was freeze-dried yogurt, but it was 100% sugar. And each wafer had 5 grams of carbs in it, 20 calories, and their recommended serving for a baby was a quarter cup. That would have been a huge amount of sugar to give a baby. And it's like a baby doesn't need, a 6-month-old baby doesn't need a dessert.
Right.
They don't need a snack that's all sugar, you know. They,
Oh my God.
and uh, and then it kind of trains them to want sugar. It
Mm-hmm.
kind of sets that up,
Yeah.
that and how many little kids, 2 and 3-year-olds, do you see, mommy, and they want something sugary?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I want this, I want this. They see something in the store and they beg you for it. And they position those kind of foods at eye level for toddlers in that aisle,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or
you
right at the
know.
cashier when you're heading out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they'll
Yeah.
have these bars. I looked at them. A lot of them have cornstarch or tapioca starch in them too, and that converts to pure sugar. And they're not even counted as added sugar. They don't have to count those as added sugar, even though they are added sugars. There's they because they use them supposedly for consistency to thicken the
Right.
food, but
Right.
a lot of these foods, junior foods, have this added corn starch, and it converts directly to glucose when you digest it. So
Wow.
there are just a big problems,
Yeah. I've
with
seen
the
some
foods.
Yeah, I've seen some ads that, or
Hmm.
some, I think it's just like memes or, things that you see
Hmm.
online where they show the same product that is in, let's say the UK, for instance, and
Hmm.
the chemicals and the ingredients are like cut in half compared to
Hmm.
what they are in the US.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's shocking to see that these
Hmm.
things are pushed into the market.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
it's really, really insane.
It's bad,
And
and
one of
it's unconscionable. To me,
Right.
it's just, it's just blatant. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Everything comes down to money at the end of the day. Just,
It does.
the more that our health
Yeah.
is bad,
Hmm.
the better, the more doctors get to prescribe
Hmm.
us more things, and it's just
Hmm.
like a revolving door. But one
Yeah.
of the things
Yeah.
that I noticed too, because now that I am a mom,
Hmm.
um, quite a few people have talked to me about the change in formula over the years and
Oh.
how
Hmm.
yeah, how there's sugar in formula. And I
Yeah.
remember when my
There
son
is.
was born,
Yeah.
I was so like, the nurses kept telling me, "Oh, you don't have milk yet, so we have to give your son formula." And I'm
Hmm.
like, "But if
That's a
I
real
don't,"
common thing.
right? And I was to my partner, I'm like, "We
Yeah.
are breastfeeding. Like, if I don't put
Yeah.
him on the breast every couple
Hmm.
hours, the
Hmm.
milk's not coming in."
Hmm.
And like,
Hmm.
he didn't understand any of that.
Yeah.
So I was fortunate enough to work with a
Yeah.
group that, taught me my rights before
Hmm.
I gave
Hmm.
birth.
Yeah.
And if I didn't know my rights before I gave birth, I just would have listened to the nurses and said,
Right.
"Yeah, you're right. There's no milk yet. Like, let's wait and just do formula, right?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
And they're supposed to be teaching the opposite. They're supposed to be
right.
encouraging breastfeeding and
I
not giving
know.
formula. But,
Yeah,
I ran into that a whole lot while I
I'm
was doing
sure.
newborn
Yeah.
ICU. I
Oh
took care of a lot of normal newborns too. And, a lot of
yeah.
that would happen. And even with one of my own daughters, I was breastfeeding too. And I told them, do not give her formula. And I know that they did.
Oh
I know that
no.
they did. Yeah.
Yeah.
My father, yeah, breastfeeding it's the difference between breast milk and formula is unbelievable. They use soybean oil in formulas. They do add coconut oil to almost all infant formulas because it has those medium chain triglycerides, which are in breast milk. Breast milk has medium chain triglycerides, the MCTs. Yeah.
Oh
It
my
has the
god.
MCTs, and coconut oil is what they use in infant formulas to give the MCTs that are in breast milk. So that's why you'll see if you look at the formula label, you'll see almost always coconut oil, and there's another oil called palm kernel oil that has it's similar to coconut oil. It's the seed of the palm fruit and it's white. It looks like coconut. And it has also, so sometimes they'll have palm kernel oil or they'll have both of those because there's no other way. None of the other common oils have these medium chain triglycerides in it. So they do that, to add those. And, but they use, a few different oils in formula. Well, in breast milk, there are 400 different kinds of lipids, which are fats
Right.
in breast milk, 400 different kinds. And then there are these sugars, they're called polysaccharides and disaccharides, and they add one or two of them to formula. Some companies do, not all of them even do that. But there are at least 200 of them in breast milk. And then there's antibodies in breast milk that help the baby fight infections and protect the baby from certain infections. And they just
Right.
can't duplicate that in formula.
Mhm.
So it's just if a woman can possibly breastfeed, that's the way to go. And well, the other thing too, the foods on the shelves. Just another point I want to make.
Mhm.
I asked my dad. He was one of the oldest of 11 children, and I said, "What did your family feed?" Because he helped take care of the little ones, and he would feed them and everything, because there were just so many of them. Um, but so how did they feed? Like when they introduced solid foods to
Okay.
yeah, what did they do? And they would start with like vegetables, soft vegetables. They would mash them up and
Right.
just give a little spoonful. And then
Okay.
when they introduced meat, he said he told me my grandfather, his father would cut up the meat in real tiny little pieces. They just make it really tiny little pieces, and they'd feed that, and the children ate it perfectly fine. And that's what they
Okay.
did. Instead of buying all these jars of food, they just whatever they were eating themselves that night, they would just, make it easy for that child to eat it. And that's what they did in those days. That was
Yeah.
100, about maybe 90 years ago.
Yeah.
And then these
Yeah.
companies come up with all these sugary, foods with cornstarch that you feed your children instead.
Yes, it's interesting that we're on this topic because
Hmm.
I have been buying my son those food pouches.
Oh
And
yeah.
I thought, okay, we'll get the organic ones. But then you look at the
Hmm.
back and there's like 17 grams of sugar in
Yeah,
one pack.
exactly. Yeah.
And I
And they'll
came
have
across,
added sugar. They're allowed to add a certain amount of added sugar, and that's just pure sugar.
yeah,
It could even be fructose that they're adding.
right,
Yeah.
exactly.
And then the
And then I,
cornstarch is, you'll
not
see that.
even, yeah.
Yeah, look at that, too, to see if there's cornstarch or
Mm.
tapioca starch on the label.
Tapioca storage.
Yeah,
Okay, I'm
yeah,
gonna look for that because there's
yeah.
another brand. I think it's called Serba Baby, or I can't remember, but it's
Mhm,
I have it in the fridge. I picked up two packs
mhm.
yesterday, and it was $5 for one pack,
Oh,
compared to like $1.50 or something for the
mhm,
other ones.
mm,
And then I
mm,
looked at the amount of grams of sugar, and there's only 3 grams of sugar. So I'm like,
mhm,
okay, that's
mm.
still a lot, but
Yeah, well, that's not
it's
bad though.
not as,
Yeah.
yeah, it's not as much.
Yeah,
So I'm
vegetables do have some carbs, but
yeah.
that's the main carb people should try to eat are vegetables. They're really important.
Vegetables.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
really like that one. And there's also bone broth in it too, so it'll help
Mhm.
to
Mm. Yeah,
boost
that's a
his
good thing.
immunity. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
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 So before we wrap up, I wanted to
Yeah.
ask you if there's any recipes that you're enjoying cooking
Mm.
now. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
let us know. Yeah.
Yeah, so, one of my favorite recipes, I think we talked about maybe the last time, I like to make spinach um,
Okay.
with coconut oil. And I make it with half coconut and half olive oil, and
Okay.
I do pretty low heat, like around 3 or 4 heat, and I get a big container. It's usually 10 ounces of baby spinach. I like,
Okay.
and so I just heat up the oil and I put minced garlic in it. Quite a bit, probably a couple tablespoons of minced garlic,
Okay.
and I put some pine nuts in it and I just kind of, mix that up, and then I start adding the spinach, like a few handfuls, and then I'll put, some salt. I like sea salt, so I put that on there, and I'll put a little bit of a spice like a garlic herb or something, and then add a few more handfuls, a little more salt, a little more of that, and then you just mix it up, and you just kind of stir it around and mix it up until it's just finished. You don't want to get too soggy and lose too much water, because you lose a lot of the vitamins in the water. Like if you don't eat the water with the vegetables, you're often throwing out a lot of vitamins if you do that. So I just cook it until it just is done. And it's really good that way. Restaurants cook it that way too. They're real careful not to over wilt the spinach and get too much of the water out of it. And it's delicious. It's delicious. And so that's one of my favorites. Another thing that I do, I like to roast vegetables. So I'll cut up broccoli. I might put asparagus. That's another thing, like broccoli and asparagus. I'll kind of, put it all out on a cookie sheet, and I'll cook it at 350 degrees. But for that one, I use coconut oil, and I'll add, again, something like olive oil to it, and I put minced garlic in it, and then I just paint the vegetables, I use one of those pastry brushes, and I just paint it with this kind of oil and garlic thing, that I make. Well, I think I put salt in it too usually, and then you don't have to salt it, on top of that. And then I just put it in the oven for like, 10, 12 minutes at 350. And then I have a whole bunch of vegetables for the rest of the week that are nice and fresh. You can do that with any kind of vegetables. I even like cherry tomatoes, things like that. You can have a little bit of roasted tomatoes. Peppers work well for people that like peppers. Um, Mushrooms, all different kinds of mushrooms you can do that with. It's just a real easy way to make a batch of fresh vegetables that you can eat for a few days.
Okay,
Yeah.
lovely. I love that. Yes, thank you for the tips, because I'm always looking for different little recipes that I can make for the family.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yes. So, do you have any questions for me? Anything you want to ask me before we wrap up?
How old is your baby?
Oh, yeah, he's 16 months in a few days. Actually,
Oh.
tomorrow is the 26th. Yeah, tomorrow he'll be 16 months.
Oh my goodness. Oh, that's a fun age. They just learn so fast. They learn so much at that age. And they
Yeah.
start getting into real trouble at that age too.
He's into a lot of trouble. He's been walking for like 2 months, and he's
Yeah.
just like, go, go, go. I'm actually
Yeah.
really surprised he's been asleep this whole time.
Oh, that's
So,
good. That's really lucky. That's really lucky.
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yes.
I have a website that people can find, and my TED Talk. Well, let's see. So my website is coconutketones.com. It's COCONUTKETONES. There's no Y in ketones. A lot of people try to add a Y.
Okay.
KETONES, coconut ketones. And then I do have a YouTube channel. It's Mary Newport MD. I believe it's 5950.
Okay.
There's two channels. One has almost nothing on it. I must have started it like years ago and forgot about it. And then though I have something like 76 videos on there, including the TED Talk that you mentioned. And then there's one there's a short video. It was the 700 Club came to our house, and they did like a
Mm,
5-minute story about my husband, and he's
yeah.
vacuuming. You get to really see it. It's a really good short little video that
Mhm,
explains it. They have a video showing the ketones in the brain and all this kind of thing,
mhm,
and a lot
mhm.
of people have found that one too.
That's how I found you, actually.
Yeah.
Yes. My auntie shared that with me from Jamaica.
Hmm.
And I was
Oh.
reading the comments, and I'm like, I
Hmm.
need to interview some of these people. And then I'm like, you
Yeah.
know what? I need to interview Miss
Ah.
Dr. Mary Newport, because I'm just going to go straight to the source. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love doing these interviews, and it's just nice to have a conversation about it. I do a lot of presentations too, and some of those are on my YouTube channel. I'm about to add another one really soon. I'm working on it as we speak.
That's so
That I'll be
exciting.
uploading soon, but it's a little more complicated. It's more about the science. So
Mhm.
presentations tend to be more formal. They're about the science, and
Right.
but the conversations are a lot of fun. Because
Mhm.
we get to talk about a lot of different things. Like this time, I got to talk about children and infants instead of just elderly people with Alzheimer's disease.
That's very true. That's very
Yeah.
true. And my target audience is particularly female entrepreneurs.
Oh,
So
nice.
yeah.
Very
So
good.
especially moms that are starting their new families or having
Oh, that's
babies.
good.
I'm a newborn photographer and maternity
hmm
photographer. So
Oh, how nice.
yeah,
How nice.
yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's beautiful. That
Yeah,
must be a lot of fun.
it really is. It really
Yeah.
is.
Wow.
It's my true honor to be able to
hmm
capture that human experience and those beautiful moments. I really want to
Yeah.
start doing birth photography actually.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
so my goal
Oh.
is to become a doula. I know we spoke about
Ooh,
doulas last time.
right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great
Yeah.
thing. I was in the delivery room with quite a few women that had doulas, and it is a beautiful thing to have. What you're doing is awesome. Yeah,
Yes, it's such a
yeah.
wonderful experience. And
hmm
while my birth wasn't, extremely long, felt like it was very long.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
have a few photos to show for it,
yeah,
and I'm very
yeah,
thankful for that. So,
yeah. Oh, that's
yeah,
good. Yeah,
yeah.
that's really good.
So I will link up your website,
Okay.
I'll link up your YouTube channel as well, and I will
Okay.
put a separate link for that specific video that you mentioned,
Okay.
that the
That
700
sounds good.
Club did as well. Yes,
Yeah.
and then also links to your books as well. I can't wait to
Oh,
get a copy of
excellent.
my own, a few copies of my
Yay.
own, and read them. And yeah,
Yeah.
so thank you so much again for
Oh, you're
being here.
welcome. You're so
Uh,
welcome. I'm glad
yes.
we got to do this, and
Me too.
yeah.
I'm excited to learn more and share the message because
hmm
more people need to hear this.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you want to help spread the message. It's just been my thing since 2008 to do that.
Mm. Well, you're reaching the right people.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
excellent. Are you on TikTok too?
I am on TikTok too.
Oh,
Yes,
I'll
I
have to find
am.
you because I am too.
I think I added you. I don't know if I
Yeah,
did or not, but I think I added you already. But
yeah.
yeah, the
Well, I've got a
short.
lot of short videos about coconut and MCT and ketone esters and just a lot of different little things about my books and that kind of stuff
Mm.
too.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna
Yeah.
help you get more people excited about this because I'm excited
Okay,
about
awesome.
this.
That's great.
Yeah.
It's great. It's so great to see you again, Minuet. I really enjoyed this.
Yes. Yeah, me too. Me too. And I hope to be able to connect with you if I do make my way down to Florida. I'll definitely
Awesome.
reach
That'd be
out.
great.
You can meet my son.
Okay, that'd be cool.